So now to the latest on the mysterious death of Nolan Wells. For the first time since Wells' body was found, we're hearing from a friend of the 18-year-old who was with him on the day that he died. Trayston Shepard, who says that he was with Wells on the 4th of July, but declined to speak on camera because of the threats that he says he's been receiving.
We did no wrong here, and we don't understand how we're getting so much hate behind it. We all cared and loved Nolan, and nobody wanted to see Nolan die. Nobody wanted to see his life be taken so short.
All right, Kajachi, and also legal analyst and attorney Brian Buckmeyer join me now for more. So, Ike, what more are we learning about why Wells stayed behind and didn't go back to the mainland with his friends?
Yeah, Kira, this has really been at the center of everything. This question, why did Nolan Wells stay behind when everyone else decided to actually leave the island? Well, now we're hearing from someone who was there that day. His childhood friend, Trayston Shepard, said that the boat that they came on experienced an electrical issue, and they had to go back to shore because of that. And he says Nolan told the group he wanted to stay behind because he met a girl and planned to catch a ride back on another friend's boat. Now, Shepard described this trip as one last hurrah before everyone scattered back to school and work after this holiday. There were about 300 people on that island that day. A lot of them were high school classmates. They knew each other, and they wanted to spend this time as just one big party before everyone dispersed wherever they needed to go. But according to his friend, Trayston Shepard said that this wasn't anything sinister at all. It was an 18-year-old who wanted to have fun, but Kira, as we know, that 18-year-old Nolan Wells never made it back to shore.
Well, and Brian, Trayston also addressed the viral video investigators, I've been looking into, saying he's actually the one yelling, not Wells. How crucial is that?
Kira, I think it's very crucial in the sense of now we know who's yelling, why they were yelling, and according to Trayston, it had nothing to do with what Nolan Wells was doing. Instead, giving us a description that a stranger was kind of getting in his face and he was yelling at him. This closed down one avenue of investigation, and while that might be heartbreaking that it doesn't give us an answer, eliminating possibilities as to what happened will hopefully steer us in the right direction, finding the right reason as to why everything happened. And then going back to something that Ike said, I hope that with Trayston saying Wells was there talking to a girl, that we can get a description of that girl, what she was wearing, who she might be, and follow up on more questions.
So then, Brian, at this point of the investigation, it's the autopsy that I know we're all waiting to hear about, because that will definitely help us try to figure out what exactly happened, right?
Yes, the autopsy is probably the next step and probably the biggest step in determining what happened here. Autopsies do two things. It tells you the cause of death and the manner of death. It could be any number of things in terms of being a homicide, an accident. I don't believe it's going to be a natural death, but that determination is going to be important. But then also, of course, the cause. What caused Nolan Wells to die? Is it strictly the drowning? Was it something else? Is there blunt force trauma? That's going to give us a lot more answers and hopefully some questions that lead to the ultimate question and answer of what happened to Nolan Wells and how did he die.
All right, Ike, Brian, thank you both.
July 4 was supposed to be a holiday outing for 18-year-old Nolan Wells and his friends. Instead, it became the beginning of a mystery that has continued to generate questions about what happened during Nolan's final hours on Horn Island. One of the most important pieces of evidence to emerge was not a photograph or a text message. It was a phone call. Around 4 p.m., a teenager aboard a boat near the western end of Horn Island contacted Sea Tow. The caller reported that the boat's bilge pump had stopped working and that the vessel was taking on water. When the dispatcher asked whether everyone was aboard and in good health, the caller answered yes and said there were approximately 7 people on the boat. At first, that sounded like a straightforward emergency call. But then came the question that changed everything. Where was Nolan? Authorities and witnesses have said Nolan was not aboard the boat when it left Horn Island. Another friend, Warren Hudson, later said Nolan had chosen to remain on the island with a girl he was with. That account has become an important part of the timeline, but it remains a witness account rather than a complete explanation of what happened afterward. Then people began listening to the recording differently. Background noise that was difficult to understand in the original release was enhanced and circulated online. Some listeners claimed they could hear alarming phrases, including words interpreted as "is he dead?" But those interpretations have not been authenticated, and people connected to those aboard the boat have disputed what the enhanced audio appears to reveal. That distinction matters. The official sea tow recording is real. The controversy is over what can actually be heard in the background, and whether later enhancements accurately represent those sounds. And if you want to follow this case without getting lost in the rumors, subscribe, like this video, and share it with others following Nolan's story. Because the next question is even more important. Was the audio genuinely revealing something hidden? Or was an unclear recording being transformed into a story it never actually told? The controversy became even more intense when people stopped listening to the original sea tow recording and started circulating enhanced versions of it. The original call itself is not in dispute. Officials released the recording, and the caller can clearly be heard reporting that the boat's bilge pump had stopped working and that the vessel was taking on water. The dispatcher asks whether everyone is aboard and okay, and the caller responds that everyone is on board. The argument begins with what happens underneath those words. In the background, there is commotion. Voices overlap. Some portions are extremely difficult to understand. After the recording was enhanced, listeners began claiming they could make out phrases that sounded alarming, including references to Nolan and questions about whether someone was dead. But there is a major problem. Different listeners hear different things. An attorney representing Nolan's friend Bart Edmiston Jr. publicly attacked the enhanced version, arguing that the recording and its accompanying transcript were misleading and effectively encouraged people to hear words in otherwise unclear audio. At the same time, audio engineer Janetta Brantley has defended her enhancement work, saying she used traditional audio processing methods rather than artificial intelligence to make the background material easier to hear. That leaves viewers facing two completely different interpretations of the same recording. One side says the enhancement exposes something that deserves investigation. The other says the enhancement changes how people perceive ambiguous sounds, and this distinction is crucial. Improving an audio recording does not automatically make every perceived word accurate. Before a recording could become reliable forensic evidence, experts would need to examine the original file, its technical properties, its chain of custody, and the exact methods used to process it. Nolan's family has taken the controversy seriously enough that their legal team hired audio experts to examine the full recording independently. So the question is no longer simply, what did people hear? The real question is, what was actually recorded? And if you're following Nolan's case and want updates based on evidence rather than viral interpretations, subscribe, like this video, and share it. Because the witness account coming next may change how that controversial recording is understood. The most controversial part of the sea tow story may not be the call itself, but what people say they can hear behind it. After the recording was released, audio engineer Janetta Brantley processed portions of the caller's channel using traditional audio techniques. She said she reduced competing frequencies, adjusted the gain, used noise reduction, and isolated background material without relying on AI voice separation. Her stated goal was to make quieter sounds easier to hear, not to create new dialogue. What she believed she heard quickly became the center of a new controversy. Some of the enhanced background sounds have been interpreted by listeners as references to Nolan, including phrases suggesting someone was dead or that something needed to be covered up. But those interpretations remain disputed. They are not an authenticated forensic transcript, and another person listening to the same recording may hear something completely different. That distinction became even more important when people connected to the boat challenged the viral interpretation. Publicly circulated accounts from friends have rejected the idea that Nolan was on the boat during the sea tow call and have described the enhanced audio as misleading. One friend also questioned why the people aboard would calmly call a towing company if someone were seriously injured or dying. But that argument creates another question. If the boat was genuinely taking on water, why did the caller report that everyone aboard was okay? And if Nolan was actually somewhere else on Horn Island, why do some listeners believe they hear his name in the background? At this point, neither interpretation independently answers those questions. The original recording establishes that the boat was in distress and that the caller reported approximately 7 people aboard. Witnesses and law enforcement accounts have separately said Nolan was not on the boat when it departed. So now the investigation has 2 competing pieces of information that must be reconciled. And if you want more updates as verified evidence emerges, subscribe, like, and share this video. Because the real question isn't simply what one person thinks they heard. It's whether the original recording can scientifically establish what was actually said. The timeline may be the strongest test of the competing stories surrounding the sea tow recording. The official recording establishes that the distress call happened before the boat's later movement away from the island. The caller reported that the vessel was taking on water because of a bilge pump problem, provided coordinates near the western end of Horn Island, and said approximately 7 people were aboard. The call was ultimately disconnected after Sea Tow arranged for private assistance, and the company did not end up towing the boat itself. But GPS evidence adds another layer. Publicly reported MDMR data shows the boat later making a sustained northbound movement beginning around 4:31 p.m., eventually returning to the mainland. The available GPS information can help establish where the vessel was moving, but it cannot determine who was aboard at every moment. That distinction is critical. A GPS coordinate can tell investigators where a boat was. It cannot tell them what every passenger was doing, whether someone transferred between boats, or where Nolan was unless additional evidence connects him to that location. Witness accounts have said Nolan remained on Horn Island after the boat experienced problems. One friend, Warren Hudson, publicly described Nolan as choosing to stay behind. Now compare that account with the Sea Tow caller saying everyone was aboard and okay. That apparent contradiction deserves investigation, but it is not automatically proof that someone lied. The exact timing of the call, the original audio metadata, the complete GPS record, passenger statements, photographs, and phone data could potentially clarify the sequence. A recent analytical review also warned that some timestamps and vessel identifications circulating online cannot be treated as definitive without access to original files and metadata. And that brings us back to the controversial enhancement. If the background voices can be scientifically authenticated, they could potentially add information to the timeline. If they cannot, then the viral interpretations may tell us more about what listeners expected to hear than what was actually recorded. If you want to follow the evidence as this case develops, subscribe, like, and share this video. Because the final question isn't which version sounds more convincing. It's which version can survive independent verification. By the end of this controversy, one thing becomes clear. The Sea Tow recording has raised questions, but it has not provided a definitive answer to what happened to Nolan Wells. The original recording is authentic in the sense that officials released it as the July 4 distress call from the boat. The caller reported that the vessel was taking on water because of a bilge pump problem, gave its location, and said approximately 7 people were aboard. The call itself is therefore an important piece of the timeline, but the dramatic claims surrounding the enhanced version remain a separate matter. Audio engineer Janetta Brantley has defended her processing and said she used traditional techniques rather than artificial intelligence voice separation. She believes the enhanced recording contains background material worth examining. On the other side, an attorney representing Nolan's friend Bart Edmiston Jr. has called the enhanced version misleading and described the accompanying transcript as unreliable. That conflict means viewers should be careful with one phrase. The audio was fake. Is no public finding establishing that the original Sea Tow recording itself was fabricated. The dispute is over the interpretation and processing of portions of that recording, and there is another important development. Nolan's family has retained forensic audio specialists to examine the complete Sea Tow call. That means the question may eventually move beyond social media arguments and into professional analysis of the original material. At the same time, investigators still have a much larger puzzle to solve. GPS records, witness statements, phone data, original video files, boat records, and forensic evidence all have to fit into the same timeline. So did the enhanced audio destroy the story everyone believed? Not yet. What it has done is expose a gap between what people think they hear and what investigators can actually prove. If you want to follow Nolan's case as new evidence emerges, subscribe, like this video, and share it. And remember, speculation should never become harassment or an accusation against someone who has not been charged. Nolan's family is still looking for answers. And ultimately, the question is simple. When the original audio, forensic evidence, witness accounts, and complete timeline are finally examined together, will they reveal what happened to Nolan Wells during his final hours?